we felt it was our duty to invite our friends, our neighbors, to table of Abraham, Abraham's table. And we asked from him, it is within his power, we believe that these gatherings are going to be fruitful for our society. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Robert Hunt. I'm going to read his bio. Dr. Robert Hunt was born in Dallas, Texas. After attending school in Austin and Richardson, he majored in history at the University of Texas in Austin. After completing a Master of Theology at Perkins School of Theology, SMU, he served the Bethany United Methodist Church in Austin, Texas. In 1985, he and his wife, Lillian, moved to Kuala Lumpur, where they taught at the Seminary Theology Malaysia. From 1993 to 1997, he taught at the Trinity Theological College in Singapore. In 1994, he received his PhD from the University of Malaya, focusing on Christian missions to and relationship with Muslims in Southeast Asia. From 1970 to 2004, he was pastor of the English-speaking United Methodist Church of Vienna and an adjunct professor at Webster University in Vienna. Dr. Hunt is presently director of Global Theological Education at the Perkins School of Theology, Southern Methodist University, and teaches courses in world religions, interreligious dialogue, and mission. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hunt. Thank
you very much. I'm going to click this here, and then if it works, I won't have to hold it. Does that work okay for you all?
Yes.
Good. Oh, the next thing may be to put it in my pocket. Okay, good. Well, I'm very happy to be here and very honored to be invited to Abraham's table to speak to you. The original title of my talk was a little more controversial than Interfaith Dialogue, Misconceptions and Religious Answers. I like that. The original title was, Can People with Real Faith Engage in Interfaith Dialogue? Now that may seem like an odd title, especially for a gathering that is dedicated to interfaith relations and dialogue. It may seem like an odd title because we live in a world today in which there are a number of different interfaith and interreligious dialogue initiatives, and I'm going to mention a couple of them. Some of you are perhaps aware that about a year and a few months ago, in the summer of 2008, the Muslim World Federation and the Saudi Arabian government sponsored a huge dialogue conference in Madrid. There was supposed to be some follow-up, not much has come of it, but nonetheless, it was a huge initiative. They brought 400 or 500 people together in Madrid for this conference, and it was very well managed. You're probably aware there's also what is called the Common Word Initiative, a group of scholars motivated a bit by a Center of Interfaith Dialogue in Jordan, have invited Christians and Jews to enter into dialogue with them, and there's been some follow-up at that with Yale University. And of course, right here in the United States, we have the work of the IID, which we all know very much, and is very, very active, especially here in the southern part, south central and southeastern part of the United States. And probably right now, frankly, is doing more on interfaith dialogue than any other organization in the United States, as far as I know, and I think I know. So there's been a lot. The Roman Catholic Church is engaged in a number of interfaith dialogue initiatives, inviting Muslim leaders, especially to think about Christian-Muslim dialogue, inviting Muslim leaders and Jewish leaders to the Vatican. So on one hand, a lot is going on in interfaith and interreligious dialogue, and there's clearly a good deal of commitment across the different religious communities to it. At the same time, we need to recognize that even as these dialogue initiatives go forward, there have been protests against interfaith dialogue and interreligious dialogue. Some of those protests are quite active, and I'm going to mention a couple of those. Some of those are more or less silent. That is to say, you hold a dialogue event and nobody comes. They prefer not to say, I don't want to come, they just don't show up, you know. Or sometimes they say it's important and they don't do it anyway. As you know, it's the most important thing in the world that nobody actually wants to do. So that's a problem. But what I want to consider for a moment is, because I think it's a real problem in several religious communities, as I will explain, is the kind of protest against engaging in interfaith dialogue. And I'm going to give two examples of this, and there are others, but I don't want to bore you. I think we'll use this to stimulate some discussion. First, I want to go to the country of Malaysia. My wife and I lived in Malaysia for 7 years, and I follow political and religious events in Malaysia closely even up until now, and I write about it academically. Well, some interesting things happened in Malaysia over the last 10 or 12 years, but I want to focus on the years 2005 and 2009, or from 2005 to 2009. In 2004 and 2005, the Prime Minister of Malaysia, Dr. Badawi, suggested that the government should be engaged in interfaith dialogue or interreligious dialogue, and he proposed that the government would set up a commission to promote interreligious dialogue over some of the important social issues of the day. In particular, he was concerned to promote an idea that he called Islam Hadiri, or civilizational Islam. And he felt like this was an idea that the government was going to put forth as its vision of Islam, and that he would therefore invite Christians, Jews, Muslims, Sikhs, Buddhists, and Hindus to all come and discuss this. Now, that was a proposal that was met warmly by the religious groups in Malaysia, the non-Muslim religious groups in Malaysia, and the Malaysian Bar Council, which is itself a dominantly Muslim group, immediately announced that it would hold an interfaith meeting, and that meeting would be the first of several conferences that would come up with a legal framework within which the government could promote interfaith dialogue. So the Bar Council, which represented the lawyers, would then draft a law for the government that would allow this interfaith council. Well, that was the positive reaction. The negative reaction came immediately from a group called the Allied Coordinating Committee of Islamic NGOs, representing everything from the Muslim Chamber of Commerce to a variety of social service agencies, to actually members of the Prime Minister's own religions department. And they vehemently and publicly protested, saying that it was demeaning to Islam to speak with members of other faiths about the country and the way in which the country would develop. And in fact, they protested at the first meeting of the Bar Council Association, and they protested so violently that the subsequent meetings had to be canceled, and people were injured. Now, and as I said, the basis of the protest was the assertion that with regard to all matters of society and political systems, only Muslims should be consulted about the future of a dominantly Muslim nation. And in fact, one of the leaders of the Malaysian Chamber of Commerce, a Mr. Ma, stated that he was not even happy that Muslims would be consulted. That he was really the only person to be consulted. Well, that's a brave thing, but he certainly didn't think that Christians and Hindus and Buddhists and others should. According to him, the only conversation between Muslims and non-Muslims was one in which non-Muslims would be told where to take their place in society. Now, these actions were consequential. As a matter of fact, the meetings were broken up by protests, and up until today, there is no official forum for interfaith or interreligious relations regarding, including Muslims in the country of Malaysia. None at all. It's impossible. I will say this, though, that the political actors in the protest were seriously defeated in the 2008 election in Malaysia. So it appears that, in fact, although there were these loud protests against interfaith dialogue from certain Muslim parties in Malaysia, that the vast majority of the Muslim population in Malaysia supported it. So it's an interesting dichotomy, the politics of the street versus the popular vote. Okay, now let's turn to Singapore, Malaysia's near neighbor. Because at almost exactly the same time that the Malaysian government was proposing that there be an official standard of interfaith dialogue,